Hello everyone, now that I'm diving a little bit more into the nighttime sound, I want to show you what I've learned in regards to the structures and arrangement of a nighttime or full-on track. So this is my first actual, almost like finished nighttime production. You can see there's still a sketchbook in here, there's still stuff that I need to add to this. But the structure is pretty much finished for it, so that means that I can now talk about it. And just the very first observation that we'll have to make is that there's a lot of kick and bass in this track. You can see the amount of red and the amount of blue that is in here. All of that is going to be the kick and bass, and we can see that the breaks in here are very, very short. So this is a break in here. We have a little bit of a build-up over here even. That means that the intro is only 8 bars long. So you can hear that the whole start of the track is kind of designed to immediately get you from an intro into the kick and bass dancing as quickly as possible. And if we have a look at the tracks that I've laid out below over here, you can see that for most of my more progressive stuff that I've been doing before this, that is really not the case. You can see that intros tend to be fairly long. Over here as well, you can see the intro over here. I believe the kick and bass start also around here somewhere, yeah, over here. So you can see just in terms of length, this is half the length of even the shortest intro that I have for my more progressive stuff. And just to give you a little bit of a sneak preview, there are also intros that are even longer than the stuff that you see over here. This one is a little bit on the extreme side. As you can see, it's like 4 minutes long before we get into a kick and bass. And of course, this is much more considered like either a set opening or in this case also the opening for the album itself. So it makes sense to have a longer intro like that. But this is not something that you would really ever see in a more nighttime or full-on track. When it comes to the nighttime or full-on genre of Psytrance, it is really just the focus on the kick and bass. And that is also something that I see when I started studying how the breaks are used and why they are used in different parts. And the way that I would describe it is almost like taking a true drop structure from a progressive Psytrance track. So here we have drop 1 and drop 2 over here. You can see there's some fills in between, but let's say that we ignore these little things here and just call this drop 1 and drop 2. And you can almost imagine that we have taken these 2 drops, created another one of that length, and put that in a track. So you can see over here, this is a drop length. You can see over here, there's another drop length. And you can see over here, there's another drop length, including the outro over here, which I call it differently. So you can almost imagine that we basically needed to make a lot more space in the intro and in the breakdowns in order to get those 3 drops in. If you compare it with your traditional 3 drop structure, like we have over here, where we actually have 1, 2, 3 different ideas, you'll notice that the drops have to be much shorter. You can see we only have 3 sections over here and 3 sections over here. Whereas in the full-on counterpart, we have 5 and even 6 sections, although one of those sections is only 8 bars. So you can imagine that in terms of space where you're dancing, you just have a lot more space in the more nighttime and full-on genres. The second thing that means is that in terms of your energy level of the track, you spend a lot longer of the track at a very high energy level. Another example of that is if we look again into the progressive track, what you'll find is that this will be a low energy part of the drop where the drums aren't really there yet. There's going to be very soft sequences. Usually there's going to be more stuff like one-shots and whatnot. And then slowly here you go to your mid-level and then you go to your higher level. And then at the higher level, at this point, it resets. There's going to be a build-up. It's going to fade out over here and it's going to go back into a lower energy. That is the whole idea of the progressiveness, is that you kind of flow with the energy level over time and it literally just progresses over time. Well, in the full-on tracks, we still have this kind of progression in the sense that the first kick and bass is always going to play on its own, and then it's going to have a little fill, and then the first drums are going to appear, and then there's going to be a little fill, and then a few more drums are going to appear, and there you're creating kind of these steps in terms of energy level. What tends to be the case is that when you get to the high energy level, you kind of keep it for longer. You keep it for 2, 3 sections rather than just 1 or 2. And you can see that happening multiple times here. In this drop, I would say that we have 3 segments. In this drop, I would say that we have 4 segments. And then in this drop, again, we have 3 segments here that are all at the high energy level. Now, as a consequence, what will end up happening is that your track just gets a lot fuller with sequences, because sequences tend to play mostly when we are in the highest energy part of the track. Of course, you can imagine we have this now continuous barrage of sounds that are doing cool things, stuff like this. So just this constant energy, these constant sounds kind of coming at you, that is really one key part of the high energy parts of your track. Now this is sort of the macro level of the whole track. This is the structure if you look at it over the whole track. And you can imagine that you could, for example, draw that out. If we go into the MIDI of here and I use this utility that we already have here, we can say, okay, the energy starts fairly slow. And then over the course of the first 2 drops, it's going to rise. Here it is at a high moment. Throughout the drop, it is rising a little bit more, but let's say that it rises to this point over here. Then we get a little bit of a build-up that then goes into the kick and bass again. And then it slowly rises up even more over here, and we stay in the high energy. I believe I said that this is the high energy over here, so it would look something like that. Maybe again, it rises up a little bit over here. I do believe that this part of the drop is a little bit lower in energy again, so it would look something like this. And again, build up. Of course, in a build up, the energy is rising. That's the whole point of a build up. So that is what we're doing. And then in the little fill, you can even see it in the waveform. The energy just gets a little bit lower. And then you can see it here again. We have the low kick and bass and the energy just rises. So up until here, it rises up again. And this is our high energy part, where it then transitions into an outro. And then of course the track fades out. So this is kind of the story of our track in terms of what the energy is doing in general. Now, of course, the exact values over here aren't representative of anything. It is just the idea that over the course of the track, you're going to be rising up for a certain point of time. And after that certain point of time, say 2 sections of 16 bars, you're at that high energy, which you then keep for a little bit, only to lower then again so that you can build up again. And that may be either 2 times or 3 times in your track. As I said, in this case, I went with a 3-drop structure, which means that there's 2 breaks, meaning there's 2 parts where the kick and bass doesn't play, while you can still see the kick and bass in the structure over here. In these cases, it plays filtered. So the kick and bass really is playing in a non-danceable way. All of the low frequencies have been removed. It isn't as impactful. And that is really one of the things that you want out of this. Because we're staying high energy for so long and because it's so powerful, you do want to have moments where it just kind of comes back down again. Because what tends to happen with very energetic tracks, if they're energetic throughout the whole thing, let me just edit this curve here. If we had an energy level that looked like this, at some point, the track would become boring. At some point, if the energy is just staying steady over time and it's always high energy, you're going to lose all of the power of that high energy. It's just going to be normal energy because high energy is relative to something else. Now, of course, to achieve these fluctuating levels of energy, what we tend to use is fills. And what I've noticed is that I've been doing a lot more with the kick in the fills. If we open up the kick group here and we just look at the track that are kick fills, I can color them bright orange and then assign the clip color here. We can see that throughout the structure, there's a lot of things happening with the kick fills. So this is my main kick over here. This is just doing the part of the beat. As you can see, there's some parts where it helps with the build-up and whatnot, but it's mainly responsible for just the beat of the kick, the main beat that we're dancing to. And then I have all of the kicks for my kick fills over here and my reverse kicks as well. So they both get a separate channel so that I can easily mix them once I get to mixing this track. But either way, you can see there's quite a lot of them. And one thing that you'll also see is that there's quite a lot of them in between the segments of 16 bars. I can draw that out again by using some MIDI here. MIDI is really a useful tool when you're trying to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a 16 bar clip here. I'll make 1 white and 1 dark. And then we can see exactly where the fills are going to be because they're going to be at the points where we go from one clip into the other. So you can see we have our first 8 bars of intro. Then we have our build-up over here. There's a small fill at the end here, getting us into the first drop, which lasts up until this point over here. We can see it's fill happening here in that there's 1 bar of fill where the kicks are missing and where the bass is also not playing. There's a little bit of an auxiliary bass thingy playing here, but that's not the main bass, of course. This is just like a little sub-down thing. Then after that, in the section again, what we can see is that our main fill is happening over here. So this is the main fill, but there's also this thing happening in the middle where the kick actually just stops and there's an actual kick fill happening. In segments before, what you'll see is that there's just like a reverse kick into the next segment or like a double kick where there's a kick on the offbeat. But here you can see I'm also sometimes just breaking up the kick and bass pattern itself to make kick fills in there. And just going through that, you'll see that sometimes it is after 12 bars. So you can see we're going 12 bars into the segment and then we have our first fill here. Sometimes it is both at 8 as well as 12. Here I think I'm just doing something where the kick plays like a little earlier or later. Yeah, this kick plays one step later than it's supposed to play, which can give some really cool effects like this. Now moving forward a little bit, what you can also see is segments like this where I go really crazy. You can see how many different patterns and things there are in the kick over here. This is really one of those places where I needed to raise the energy level massively because we're kind of stuck at this low medium range here. Not really too much happening in this part of the track. And in the next part of the track over here, we already get a lot of extra power out of it. So you can imagine between those ideas, there needs to be a nice way of transitioning from that lower energy into that higher energy. And that is where something like a build-up fill like this can really come in handy. The way that you can imagine this and the way that I've also written this down is that this last part over here is the fill, where we have the actual different kick pattern. And then everything that is happening before it, even though we're like filtering into it already, and there's already some things happening with like kick fills and little pauses in the bass that you can see over here in the waveform as well. All of this is to prepare the listener for this like big fill that is going to come here. One of the key features of fills like this is that they really nicely indicate the structure. So what that means is right now, if you look at it, the way that I'm doing this is I'm not messing with the kick and bass for quite a long time. And then after 10 bars, 12 bars, and then from 12 bars onwards, we have something that is happening to the kick and bass. So over here, after the 10th bar, we have this reverse kick thing happening, where it's literally the kick in the place where it's supposed to be, but reversed in terms of the waveform. And that is just layered on the bass line, as you can see normally. And then 2 bars later, we have another little fill thing happening here. This is also being filtered in, so now you can hear the low pass starting to take into effect. And all of that is in preparation for this moment over here, so that makes sense in the structure, that something is happening there. Right, you can imagine that what we're doing is we're setting up the listener to be able to count in bars of 2. So 2 bars over here, 2 bars over here. And really, ideally, you would start here, 2 bars, 2 bars, 2 bars, 2 bars, 2 bars, 2 bars, and then we're at the start of our like cool idea that we're doing. And you can imagine that even that cool idea, it has 2 bars over here before it changes again into something new. So in terms of the structure, those are like the micro ideas, I would say. And when it comes to the micro ideas, what you need to keep into account is that they always should follow the macro idea of your track, right? It's really cool if you create a cool drum fill like this, but if this drum fill and all of the building elements in it rise up to a segment that is really low in energy, it doesn't really make sense to have a build-up for that. Now, the final cool thing that I want to show is how closely this remains to a 16-bar structure. When it comes to my more progressive tracks, what I tend to do is I tend to be a little bit more liberal with exactly where the segments are and exactly where everything is playing, in the sense that, for example, over here, we have, as you can see, 12 bars between the last drop and this drop over here. That isn't really happening within my other track, within my actual full-on track. We have 16 bars, 16 bar drop, 16 bar drop, 16 bar drop. Again, fill at the end there, 16 bar drop, fill at the end of 2 bars here. So this is technically 14 bars plus 2 bars for the fill. But that always sums together to 16 bars. And even here, where we have an 8-bar break, what we do is we follow that up by an 8-bar drop, little fill here, so that we're again synchronized with the 16-bar grid. the one that I put over here in the kick drum. You just get that over here. You can see that we're in sync with that. And we just continue to be in sync with that over here, over here, over here. And the breakdown is again 15 bars of a breakdown and build up thing. And then the 16th bar is the actual fill. And that then goes back into the kick and bass, which is again just doing segments of 16 bars, including the fill. And again, you can see that we have different fill lengths. In order to reflect that on the structure, we would look at something like this probably. You can see that now it lines up with the actual waveform that we have. But you can also see that again, 16 bars here. In this case, we have 16 bars again. This is a recording from much earlier in the production. So right now, if we scroll down over here, you can see that there's still fill there. So technically speaking, if we again want to highlight that in the structure itself, we can do this for 1 bar and then create its little fill there. So everything is synced with these 16 bars, and that makes the track really predictable and therefore also really danceable. It doesn't mean predictable in a bad sense. You can still play within the structure to do all kinds of cool things, which is of course what I'm doing within this track. But by keeping the structure very standard, you kind of ensure that it immediately becomes danceable. Of course, there's other factors in there. The kick and bass needs to sound good. The drum needs to be mixed well. All of the synths need to have a nice groove and all of that kind of stuff. But from, again, a macro standpoint, this track is very easy to understand when you're on the dance floor. Because again, it's just going to do things in segments of 16 bars, which is something that we kind of automatically count out when we're dancing. I think I've talked about this idea one time before on my channel, where when you're at a festival, you can sometimes notice people that are dancing kind of jump into whenever the first kick hits. So if the kick hits over here, you can see them kind of in the fill, anticipating the kick is going to come, and then here they know, and then they jump into it. The reason why they're able to do that, where they're able to predict when the music is going to start playing again and when they can start to dance again, and why everybody seemingly can be able to do that, is because these structures are so well defined. There's so many tracks that use these kind of structures that we get used to them. Of course, the DAW also kind of forces you to write in this way, in the sense that if you look at it from the grid point of view, you start with 4 bars over here, which is highlighted differently from 4 bars over here, which is highlighted differently over here, which is highlighted differently over here. If you zoom out even more, you get to a point where every 16 bars is just highlighted. So it kind of also makes natural sense for the music to sound like that. Not just because the DAW kind of forces you to move into that direction, but also because it is a very explored way of writing the music, and therefore it does make it very, very danceable. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about really is the learning part. When it comes to learning how to structure a track like this, I wasn't able to do all of this from the get-go, right? I've listened to a lot of Psytrance, I've listened to a lot of Full-On starting out this production. Honestly, the whole beginning of this idea came from just being at WoW Festival for 5 days. Of course, when you're dancing for 5 days and you get to just listen to the music, you kind of start to understand how the structure works as well, and where all of the fill goes, where all of the little complexities goes that you're doing with the kick and bass, all of those little fills in the middle, right? All of these things. This stuff as well. If you listen to this kind of music for long enough, you're going to get to a point where you know where it feels natural to have these kind of fills and where it doesn't. And this really all ties back to the last video that I made, which is where I talked about the one trick that pros use, and that is to listen to a lot of music. Get inspiration from a bunch of different places, see where all of those tracks that you're listening to are kind of the same. One of the things that you'll probably notice is that they're all writing again in these kind of ideas of 16 bars. But once you've listened to a whole bunch of those tracks over, say, a couple of months, you listen to it for, again, half an hour to an hour every day, which is what I talked about in the last videos as well. If you do that enough, at a certain point, you're just going to naturally understand what makes these kind of structures work. And then from there, it becomes almost second nature writing them. So that is the final tip that I want to give you there. As you can see, it is a combination of thinking about the macro of it and then putting a whole bunch of little micro kind of flows into that. I've talked about mainly the kick and bass and all of the little fills that I'm doing here, but there's many more elements that I can cover, because at the end of the day, when it comes to it, all of the elements that you see on the screen right now contribute in some way to the flow of your track. So literally, I could open up every single element in here and have a little spiel about how it contributes to that part of the flow of the track. But this is just kind of stacking upon stacking of little micro ideas that together should form one single macro idea in terms of the energy over time throughout the whole track. So that means that is going to be the end of the video for today. I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know if you did by leaving a like and making sure that you're subscribed. Another way that you can support the channel is by becoming one of my patrons, for which there are many benefits, including early access to content and discount codes for my products on my Gumroad page. So if you're interested in any of that, the link will be in the description. But that's going to be it for today. Bye bye.